Welcome to the Soulful CXO, where we discuss leadership principles, core values, health, wellness, and resiliency. I'm Dr. Rebecca Wynn, the founder and the host of the show. Do you have a topic or guest you would like to be featured on the show? Would you like to be a sponsor? Please reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me at rebecca@soulfulcxo.com. Please go to our partner, Cybersecurity Tribe, for weekly show recaps and other resources. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Now sit back and enjoy the show. Welcome to the Soulful CXO. I am your host, Dr. Rebecca Wynn. We are pleased to have with us today Chuck Brooks. Chuck is a globally recognized thought leader and subject matter expert in cybersecurity and emerging technologies. He is adjunct faculty at Georgetown University's Graduate Cybersecurity Risk Management Program, where he teaches courses on risk management, homeland security, technologies, and cybersecurity. LinkedIn named Chuck as one of the top 5 tech people to follow on LinkedIn. He was named Cybersecurity Person of the Year for 2022 by Cyber Express, one of the world's top 10 cybersecurity and technology experts by Best Rated, a top 50 global influencer in risk and compliance by Thomson Reuters, Best in the Word in Security by CISO Platform and IFSEC, the second global cybersecurity influencer on Thinkers 360. In addition, he has been featured in 2020, 2021, 2022, Analytica, Who's Who in Cybersecurity, and named one of the top 5 executives to follow on cybersecurity by Executive Mosaic. He is a GovCon expert for Executive Mosaic and GovCon Wire, cybersecurity expert for the network at Washington Post, visiting editor, Homeland Security Today, and a contributor to Skytop Media and for Forbes. Chuck, great to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Great to see you again. A pleasure to be here. Thank you, Rebecca.
You know, we've been on several different shows before in the past, but I always think your background is fascinating. So you can walk us through that, because you started in poli-sci, then you got a little bit more in strategy, and then you became the thinker and we're on the hill. So I'd love to hear that story.
Sure. I'm happy to tell it. It's, when I went to college, which was way back, we didn't even have electric typewriters back then, so let alone the internet. So, like every other kid, I was interested in the global scenario, what's going on. And also it was a liberal arts school, small school in Indiana called DePauw, which I loved, by the way. It was only a couple thousand people. And I was from Chicago originally, and sort of go back into the Indiana heartland where all the farms are. It was fun. And people were genuine and nice. So I enjoyed it. So poli-sci and English were my focus there. And then I went immediately to University of Chicago and studied international relations, and particularly more in the national security realm with Albert Wallstetter at the time was teaching. And national security was the focus. And again, it was just now beginning for electric typewriters there. So, all my exams are not like my daughter's now where they can edit and do stuff. But, it was, you had to either write it or type it. And that was it. So cybersecurity wasn't there yet. And I came to Washington, D.C. And that's a typical Washington, D.C. story. I went to some party. I befriended a retired general who is also former deputy director of the CIA and former head of DIA. Lieutenant General Danny Graham, and he said, would you like to do some writing for me? And I said, sure. I was very excited. Wrote some stuff on strategic missiles, high frontier, SDI, all that stuff. And they said, you're doing a great job. Would you like to serve in the Reagan administration? And I said, yeah, that would be really fun. And so I got an appointment to assist the director, working under Richard Carlson. You probably know his son, Tucker Carlson. But Richard is a very nice guy. He was head of Voice of America. It was still the Cold War, and not a secret now, but a lot of the stuff in the communication activities, the different language stuff, which was then by shortwave radio. It wasn't even, the internet yet either. And there were weighing computers now that I'm working on. So I worked there for a while and got picked up, worked on the Hill for almost 10 years doing technology and security issues. And you see the evolving capabilities of the technology back then. Then people were starting to look at, the implications of all these new emerging technologies, and the new revolution is coming ahead, but not quite. And then I got a call and said, would you like to be part of a big startup? And the big startup happened to be DHS. So that's really when I think I could say my cybersecurity career, because I was hired as in legislative affairs to help set up and create 2 directorates. One was the Science and Technology Directorate, which is still around, and the other one is a domestic nuclear office which is eaten up, I think, by S&T. And so my role there was to work with all the SMEs and create all kinds of stuff. It was mostly chem, bio, rad, nuke, explosive focus initially, but there was a strong cybersecurity element, and it was just the beginning where everything was getting connected. So I worked on those issues, prepared a lot of briefs and stuff, and got really, just really into the area. And when I left, then I just followed that career path, first with SRA International, which is now GDIT, where I did a lot of work there, and then Vice President of Homeland Security for Xerox, similar kind of thing. And then most recently, I retired out of General Dynamics Mission Systems, where I was doing a lot of growth strategy for cybersecurity in that role. Again, it's changed so much, working from everything in with architecture, coding, everything over those years, mostly on my own, but also working with the IT shops and stuff. I learned a lot. So I didn't come from the technical background, but I think I caught up. And now, as you mentioned, my thing, I'm doing my own thing, teaching and doing consulting, which is fun. But it's an interesting career path. You're right, and I think people are mistaken when they think that you have to be a coder just to be in cybersecurity. I'm teaching courses. A lot of these people have a technical background, but it's really become an industry that requires everything, particularly management, understanding of the intricacies, the policies. There's sales and marketing, of course, really you need expertise, and you have to know the technologies there too. And then, all the operational aspects of cybersecurity. So it really is just like any industry now. It's not limited to one thing. It's very broad. And now with the emerging technologies coming on board, it's even broader.
You mentioned the Reagan administration, but what was the other administration you worked under?
The Bush administration under DHS when it was set up, first for Secretary Tom Ridge and then for Secretary Michael Chertoff. So I stayed there for two secretaries. And I kept my ties. I'm very active with DHS still. And it's fun to see the change. And now they're DHS CISA, of course. But, the focus has really changed from the counterterrorism focus to the cyber focus there too, in terms of at least funding.
That's great. Because I just tell people it's always interesting when you're under different administrations. When I did the DoD work with NCI Information Systems, I was doing all the base realignment, all that stuff. So I was under ISAC, doing a lot of that work. I ended up having Bush and Obama, and a lot of times when you have administration changes, the world can change very quickly.
Yes.
In a lot of those projects. But the one thing is that failure is not an option, and you got to get her done. And so when people say, how did you cut your teeth so quickly in technology and all that kind of stuff? Because I was basically kind of boots on the ground in some very hectic situations that you had to get her done, and you got to figure it out, and you can't always Google anything. You got to know how to read.
Exactly. And you have to learn from others too. I mean, that's the other thing. There's a lot of institutional knowledge there and legacy that you build on, as well as being looking forward, of course. But you're right about the politics. I think really it's interesting, mostly in the technology and cyber world. That's the least partisan of all the issues I've ever had to deal with, because people are focused really on the application of the technologies and the threats. It's not so much, who gets accolades or whatever. It's really keep us all safe. So it's a really different perspective, I think, politically, when you work in technology and cybersecurity.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes the project might shift, but at the end, it's protecting the UDISs here and abroad. And that was the end of it. It didn't matter. No one ever asked me what my political party was the whole time I did work there. You're well known as being a thought leader, looking at emerging technologies, things along those lines. And you said this publicly, the cyber ecosystem is in a precarious situation. How do you see the advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning? I know they've been around since 1960s and 1950, respectfully, but how do you see that helping and hindering security operations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's precarious for a lot of reasons. One is because we never thought of security first, as either a company or as a government. And of course, the internet wasn't invented to be secure to begin with. So we're all going at this, from the back end trying to fix things. But the reality is that, as you said, artificial intelligence is not new, but some of the capabilities are new as we grow into supercomputing power and other things. And so I see that being a really key transitional aspect of cybersecurity for several reasons. One is we just don't have enough cyber expertise and people out there to do stuff, or at least they don't want to go into it. There's a global shortage that's huge. The second thing is there's just too much complexity out there and all these tools. And be able to orchestrate them and run them and a lot of people in IT shops leave, and then there's no one there. So artificial intelligence is an enabler. It's a tool, and it's basically used for helping automate things. So in that sense, it's really good for automating, threat detection, looking at maybe even identity aspects, proving who's what, looking what's in the system, and maybe collating some of the data too, structured and unstructured. But it also has, it's like most technology, it's a dual edge because the adversaries and hackers can use it. And the reality is the hackers already have advantage. I call them criminal hackers. There's a lot of white hat hackers too, but it's so asymmetrical, the ecosystem out there, because they have so many targets. You can look at governments, you can look at organizations, you can look at big companies. Of course, they're going to be targeted, but they have a lot more expertise and capabilities. But the small and medium businesses, which are the bulk of a lot of what's out in the United States, most of them have no clue. They don't even have a C-suite expertise. They're easy to target, and they're targeting them now in a rapid fashion using these machine learning capabilities to scout for vulnerabilities and exploit them, to mass send out phishing attacks. And of course, there's more sophisticated elements of them too when going after critical infrastructure. But they're also state-sponsored, which is a different reality too, with the geopolitics changing. You have the two leading countries in that, Russia and China, devoting a whole lot of time to the digital aspects of cyber warfare and espionage, and then all the various organized groups under them that sort of do their beckoning for them, but also get paid very well. It's a really dangerous landscape. So they're using that technology, and defenders have to do the same. And I think we're at an early stage where a lot of this is being adapted, but we'll see in the next few years and throughout the decade that artificial intelligence is going to be almost a requirement for any company or industry to be able to protect itself, because there's just too much data, too many technologies, too much threat out there for people to handle it.
You talk quite a lot about quantum computing and the dangers along those lines, the apocalypse. And I know that just a few years ago too, everyone thought, even all the new quantum computers are coming out of China and things along those lines, it's still many years away. What I've been wondering is, now that AI has really taken off in fruition, I think now there's like 1,000 different companies out there who are developing products. What do you think about the AI apocalypse? Yeah. What are your thoughts along those lines?
Well, I mean, the risks are pretty high with both. Again, like there's a lot of people out there, including Elon Musk, that say that, artificial intelligence is going to be our undoing. It's going to advance to such a stage that it's going to basically take over everything. That may be true in the future. I don't think it's ever going to be sentient, maybe in my lifetime. Maybe it will. But what I worry about with artificial intelligence, the same thing is, it's the humans using it for their, using it, how they use it. It's a tool again. And so, yes, it could have some apocalyptic capabilities with nefarious actors doing things and using it. For instance, they could, inject polymorphic malware all over the place and disguise it and being triggered by biometrics. There's so many technologies and capabilities to fuse it with. So I think artificial intelligence could be a very, very disruptive technology. The debate now, of course, is, do we regulate it or we don't regulate it? And obviously there's ethical considerations and then there's bias considerations in it, but it's really difficult to regulate anything, let alone in the United States. You talk about the globe, and the problem is geopolitically, is it mentioned that, the Russians, Chinese, Iranians, and North Koreans are not going to regulate anything that's going to be advantage to them. So it's a one-sided thing when you call a moratorium to start, researching and do stuff. I think we need to still, despite the risk, we need to invest heavily in learning as much capabilities and building on this computing capability as we can. And with quantum, it's the same thing. I mean, the quantum realities are, it's a race. We're working closely with a lot of allies on it. But China is very advanced in that. They've already done quantum communication, proved that at a distance. And the technologies are not necessarily having one big quantum computer. It's really using the physics of it to do analytics and predictive analytics. And there's a lot of different types of computers that are, like even photonic computers, which are available now, that could do similar kind of things. So the fear there is that whoever gets that, as you mentioned, Q-Day capability will dominate everything, because first of all, it would decrypt everything that's been encrypted, And they'll also be able to have secure communications for everything they do and dominate every industry. So I see seriousness in both those, AI and quantum. And then if you combine them, if you think about that capability, that just is really a frightening scenario. But, the reality is they're here, just like the nuclear bomb is here. You can't stop researching and doing stuff. You just got to make sure that others realize they can't overtake you, and you have to prepare to defend yourselves.
Yeah, just because you mentioned it earlier too, we have a lot of startups, and startup can be, a stealth mode. So I just started, and it could be someone who's 20, 30 years old. Part of it is your mindset on being in that kind of growth or hyper growth, or really not putting the time and effort into security, privacy, and compliance. I've seen it personally, and I've heard from other people where it's like, we don't think the CISO is a critical hire. We have other things that are more critical than, we deal with AWS or Google or another cloud provider, and they handle all the security for us. I think that those end up making those companies prime targets for, like you said, nation states and things along those lines. What do you see? I mean, when you deal with big financial companies, big health companies, and things along those lines, they do have some other infrastructure and a lot of defense and depth in place, but we have this whole huge middle market that when you look at supply chain risk, because you do business with those guys, that's where I really think that we're going to be seeing a lot of breaches and a lot of spidering breaches happening. What do you see from your world? Because you do a lot in those emerging technologies, and take a look at that.
I agree with you 100%. I think the supply chain is still very risky. It's very difficult to police the supply chain, particularly with companies that have a lot of vendors and maybe large vendors. But I'm particularly worried you mentioned healthcare, and that's still a really largely targeted area, largely because when they don't have the budgets for security, they never focused on it. Like hospitals and healthcare facilities usually use their money to procure technologies for medical use. And then they have all these various networks, the devices themselves, but also, the patients, the doctors, the nurses. And so it's really, a sieve for a lot of hackers to go after. And they do, and they're using ransomware, pretty prevalent, many, many attacks, a lot of them not disclosed, but just because they get paid and they have no morals. And I know there's a lot of people coming trying to help the hospital, even pro bono, but it's very difficult to catch up. So I think, that area, education is another area, and then financial. But you mentioned really the crux of it, which is still, again, the small, medium businesses that just don't understand the implications and think, well, I'll go to the cloud, I'm safe. But your data is your data, and you got to protect it, and you're responsible for it. And you have to have the mindset, if you're a company anywhere now, I think, that cybersecurity is not a revenue issue, it's an operational issue. And if you don't have the capability to run your own operations and make sure that you're not, at least you have resilience or be able to do instant response if something happens, you're going to be out of business pretty quickly, or your reputation is going to be ruined. And right now, those businesses, those small businesses, are easy pickings for hackers. It's low-hanging fruit. They're going after them. They're doing a lot of ransomware attacks. They're getting everything, and they're not getting prosecuted or caught. And so it's this is where crime has gone from brick and mortar to digital now. And so companies need a wake-up call, and they got to take responsibility, at least learn the very basics of cyber hygiene to protect themselves, and maybe go out and get some outside expertise. But it's not going to change. It's only going to get worse.
Yeah, I've been brought in more in one case in the last only 15 months where the company's been totally bricked and brought me in after the fact. And then when I started looking at the architecture, because I'm a security architect myself, and it's like it wasn't architected to be a way that was secure and safe. And, backups are backups. But if they brick you out of even getting to the backups, or they go ahead and they grab your credentials, that's where I've seen too. Let's go ahead and grab all the credentials instead. And therefore you can't even go to unlock those backups. What are you going to do? Like you said, it's not getting those hygienes up front. What do you think that they should do to set themselves up for success? Because I would just tell you, when I talk to other CISOs and CTOs, CIOs, it's all over the place. And I think it's extremely dangerous right now. So what do you usually recommend?
Yeah, I think you have to start with understanding. Every industry may be a little different, but start with a risk management plan. And, if you do that, at least they're looking at the right things. There are plenty of them available. NIST has, MITRE, all of them. But there are a lot of industry-specific ones too. And then in that plan, you're going to do the basics, which is first, do an inventory of what's in your network, what devices, who's got access. Then you're going to likely do penetration testing to see where your vulnerabilities, if you're already exploited, to do that. And then you really have to go through all the basic fortifications of cyber hygiene, multi-factor authentication, which helps in a big way. And you can get around it, of course, if you're a really good hacker, but for most of them, they're not going to bother. They're going to go where it's the easiest to go. So multi-factor authentication works good, and you can do that with biometrics too. Then, of course, you have to consider firewalls, segmenting your data. So it can't be with different certificates, so it can't all be taken at once. And then you have to look at, training your employees, of course. And then very important is look at, everyone's vulnerable. Anyone can get hacked. I mean, the best of them of companies have got hacked. Even a lot of the cybersecurity companies have been hacked. So expect to get hacked and have an incident response plan, a resilience plan in place. And then you'll be much better off. At least you can react to things quicker and understand the implications and keep your reputation intact.
You do a lot of teaching. What do you find is one of the biggest gaps in thinking out there? I know one of the things that I consistently speak about is I think critical thinking, being able to say this, so what does it mean to the enterprise risk? And being able to say, if I can't Google it, how do I get her done? What do you see out there teaching, and what are you teaching the students that you teach to go ahead and get them to the next level to bring us into 2025, 2030?
That is really a great question, because actually you've hit my philosophy is critical thinking is lacking in a lot of universities right now. Everything's sort of canned, everything on the internet. You really have to, and one of the things I do is with my students is, I teach one course called Disruptive Technologies and Organizational Management, is I have them operate as a CTO, select a technology, it could be anything from 5G to IoT to artificial intelligence, invent a company or take a real company, and then do a proposal of introduction of a new technology, and then the implications for operations, what's needed, implications for managing it, implications ethical, philosophical, whether it fits in the business plan, and do a whole analytical stuff for their own thought after defining what the technologies are. So it forces them to think, and they do that throughout the semester. And it's also a discussion is a key part about it too, because you're right. People forget the whole root cause element, and particularly that's associated with engineering. And a lot of my students have engineering backgrounds. You really can't look at something and look at the symptoms. You have to look at the cause of it. And that's what you need to do to have critical thinking. You can't just look at everything. Okay, well, the answer, according to Chat GPT, is this, A, B, and C. And so I fooled around with that, and in one class let them write stuff. And you can see, I mean, there's gaps there, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity, because it speaks in general terms, and it's going with data. So data out there is already on the internet. So they have to be able to learn. And, I'd love to see more of that. I love to see, more focused education on the problems with technology we have now, because I think a lot of universities have just ignored it, and really in a new era. We have a whole generations now growing up, and it's interesting to watch what's happening, how they operate. Their phones are an extension of them now. Social media dictates how they communicate and who their friends are and how many likes they get. It's really changed a lot of the brain waves, even the brain thinking, how we're wired, and the attention spans of people. Everything is now an infographic or a clip. So it's a world that's going the other direction, but I think we need to get grounded. And if you get grounded and understand, that this is where liberal arts education comes in, is I think, you need to look at all the implications, the philosophical, the political, everything, when you're looking at issues and technologies, and try and throw away your biases too. Look at things from a clear perspective. Don't accept anyone else's just because it's written. And so, hopefully my students seem to enjoy it, because a different kind of perspective, put them in charge in a sense, this is what I'm doing, this is what I've learned. And a lot of them have really picked topics they knew nothing about and became really engulfed in them. So that's at least in a nutshell. I go on forever about that, but it's a great topic, a great question.
I think that always resonates with me too. That's how I naturally think. And just because you brought Elon Musk into the conversation earlier, I think that's kind of like where he goes to, where not only is he thinking about doing this technology, but should we use it? And if we should use it, what is the best way to do that? And how can it be meaningful and impactful to the most amount of people, not only about the dollar? And I think too many things get driven by a dollar. We talked about companies, about whether it's set and forget it, just pick a framework, any framework, just go ahead and do a policy and procedure, check the box. but it's not looking about what we're trying to ecosystem. Bad guys are out there. They just have to be successful once. We have to be successful all the time.
Yeah, that's right.
You have a lot of years in leadership. You've had years where, careers are spinning in and spinning out, and then having to get on to the next thing. So what personal resiliency lessons have you learned that, keeps you engaged in the game? Because I know it can be very disheartening at times when people are in between gigs or finding their next love. What advice do you have along those lines?
That's a good question. I mean, Washington, D.C., where I live now, is sort of notorious for companies coming in and buying an M&A and all of a sudden bringing their own people in. So that's a fact of life in this world in terms of sort of the bigger companies. And then sometimes they just don't want to be in the federal market, or they want to do this. So you got to feel that you're expendable no matter, the new CEO comes in, they bring their own people. But that's the reality of employment anywhere, but particularly in certain areas where there's a lot of competition. So I got used to that because these companies that, they go through different transitions. I knew you brought in with the CEO, you work for the CEO, you're the right-hand person or whatever, and all of a sudden the CEO's gone. So that happens. And it happens in government too. It happens in every organization. So we're really talking about is having a resilience in your career. And the first thing is to do is, I think, first of all, don't get dejected. There's a lot of opportunities out there. It's just, may not be the fit at the time. And there's when one door closes, it's cliche, another one opens. But also, I think nowadays you have to really sort of separate yourself. And I go back to social media too, is that you have to create an identity so people know who you are. You should write, you should speak. You have to become authoritative in your industry, whether it's cybersecurity or whether it's automobiles, whatever it is, energy. And then you have to interact. You have to network. You have to network both digitally and in person now that hopefully that COVID is waned enough. We can go back to a lot of conferences and do stuff. And then, stay active, be involved in some of the associations that you can do leadership roles with, or be part of the committees. And you'll get great opportunities there. And you also learn a lot, because continuing learning. I mean, I think the good thing about our industry is that there's a lot of camaraderie with cyber people that speak. We're never at each other's throats, and we see stuff. We're all trying to help each other and evangelize the missions. And no matter what company you're from or we're in, it's just a natural thing. Every conference I go to, and I see a lot of the same speakers or on events and podcasts, it's all friendly. And I think that's sort of unique to most industries. And I think it's because the cybersecurity people have a different kind of perspective. I think they have a more guarded perspective on the reality and the threats, of course, but I think they realize that it's not competitive among them. It's a group effort, it's collaborative, and it's just part of a cog, and the more we help each other, the better everything gets. So, it's just really unique, because I experienced it early on, and I said, it's great, because I've been in a lot of other kind of things where particularly when you're dealing with a lot of SMEs in certain areas, they like to argue, and I saw that in a lot of things with particularly people coming out of labs and stuff, because they're glued to their project or glued to their invention. But with most people in cybersecurity, particularly in the CISO roles, CIO roles, CTO roles, and others that just do evangelizing the mission, I think it's just a different world for them, and I like that. So I think that gives me hope. I think, because I think there's people that are listening and directive, and that's why it doesn't matter who's in what administration when you're talking about cybersecurity. People will listen to you and talk to you, and they'll be happy to do what you want to talk about. And it's great. Plus, I think it's now, in terms of the government, I think there's much more collaboration between NSA, DOD, and DHS than there ever was before. They're at each other's throats, not sharing information. But now a lot of that has changed. There are barriers, but they're getting broken down.
Our time has run out. It's been going real fast. What is the best way for people to get a hold of you for speaking engagements, or if they want to engage your services?
Sure. I think LinkedIn is the easiest place, because I'm very active on LinkedIn. I have 102,000 followers now, and I run several groups there too, and I have a newsletter. So that's the easiest way to follow me, or just send me a message there. The problem with my email is there's just too many emails right now. So I think it's a problem with all of us out now. You get hundreds of emails. You can't. Sometimes they go into spam. You don't see them. But LinkedIn, you can't miss it. At least it's there, and it stays there until you remove it. So LinkedIn is a good way to do that.
Well, Chuck, thank you. You are a Soulful CXO.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Rebecca.